Each time you experience an unexplained fury towards a stranger. Each instance you find yourself unreasonably attracted to someone you've just encountered. Every moment you hear yourself declaring, "I would never behave that way," with unusual certainty. These are not mere coincidences. They are hints of your shadow, the concealed architect of your life's greatest setbacks and your untapped potential. For years, we've been instructed that self-improvement involves focusing on positivity, strengths, and conscious objectives. Yet, countless individuals remain trapped in cycles of self-sabotage, repeating the same patterns despite numerous self-help books and therapy sessions. The reason is that we're looking in the wrong direction. The most powerful forces shaping your life aren't in your conscious awareness. They're hidden in what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow isn't just some abstract psychological idea. It's the single most influential force determining whether you'll achieve genuine fulfillment or remain trapped in unconscious patterns. Those who master their shadow discover purpose and power beyond ordinary consciousness. Those who ignore it remain puppets of forces they refuse to acknowledge. The birthplace of your shadow begins forming the moment you learn that certain parts of yourself are unacceptable. As a child, you quickly discover which emotions, desires, and behaviors earn approval and which bring rejection. When your anger causes adults to withdraw love, you learn to suppress it. When your neediness is met with irritation, you bury it. When your wildness is punished, you contain it. This psychological amputation isn't a single event, but a continuous process throughout childhood. Parents, teachers, religious institutions, and peers all communicate that certain aspects of your natural self are problematic. Rather than risk rejection, you instinctively exile these qualities from conscious awareness. You don't merely hide them, you actively repress them until they become invisible to your conscious mind. Jung described this process with disturbing clarity. The shadow is that hidden, repressed, for the most part, inferior and guilt-laden personality whose ultimate ramifications reach back into the realm of our animal ancestors. In simpler terms, the shadow contains everything you've decided is too dangerous to acknowledge about yourself. This repression comes with a psychological law that Jung recognized. What you repress doesn't disappear. It goes underground and gains power. The emotional energy used to keep these elements suppressed becomes unavailable for conscious living. The shadow isn't limited to negative qualities. Any aspect of yourself deemed unacceptable becomes shadow material. This includes positive traits like creativity, ambition, or sexuality that may have been discouraged in your particular family or cultural context. The tragedy is that your most unique gifts often end up in your shadow because they didn't fit neatly into your early environment. The shadow refuses to remain hidden indefinitely. It communicates through specific signals that, once recognized, become gateways to transformative self-knowledge. The most common shadow signal is projection. Attributing your disowned qualities to others with emotional intensity disproportionate to the situation. When someone's behavior triggers an immediate visceral reaction in you, it's rarely about them. It's your shadow recognizing itself in the external world. As Jung noted, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Consider your strongest judgments. The qualities you find most repulsive in others are precisely what you've disowned in yourself. The person who rails against others' dishonesty while justifying their own white lies. The parent disgusted by their teenager's sexuality while repressing their own desires. The colleague who criticizes others' ambition while denying their own. Competitive nature. These projections aren't limited to negative qualities. Excessive admiration and instantaneous connection often signal positive shadow projections. When you're inexplicably drawn to someone's creativity, courage, or authenticity, you're often recognizing exiled parts of your own potential. Dreams provide another channel for shadow communication. Recurring dream figures, particularly those that disturb you, often represent shadow elements seeking integration. Physical symptoms sometimes manifest as shadow expressions, particularly when emotions remain unacknowledged. Addictive behaviors and compulsions often serve as shadow management strategies. Perhaps most tellingly, areas of repeated failure despite conscious intention reveal shadow interference. When you continually sabotage relationships, career opportunities, or health goals, despite genuine conscious desire for success, shadow forces are likely at work. Most people actively avoid confronting their shadow, preferring the temporary comfort of denial to the initial discomfort of awareness. This avoidance comes with predictable consequences. The first consequence is projection. When you refuse to acknowledge qualities within yourself, you compulsively project them onto others. This creates a world populated by your disowned self parts disguised as external threats and enemies. The person in shadow denial lives in a reactive state, constantly triggered by others who simply mirror what they refuse to see in themselves. Shadow denial also generates what Jung called possession, being unconsciously controlled by the very qualities you've disowned. The most judgmental people often secretly engage in what they condemn. The moralistic preacher who rails against sexual immorality while secretly visiting prostitutes. The anti-corruption politician caught in financial scandals. Perhaps most costly is the loss of vital energy. Maintaining shadow repression requires enormous psychological energy. The constant vigilance needed to keep disowned parts from consciousness depletes the energy available for creative living. Many experiencing persistent fatigue or lack of motivation suffer not from physical deficiency, but from the exhaustion of shadow suppression. Shadow denial also prevents authentic connection with others. When significant aspects of yourself remain, unacknowledged, genuine intimacy becomes impossible. You present a curated self-image rather than your whole being. Others sense this inauthenticity even when they can't articulate it. Most tragically, shadow denial blocks access to your unique gifts and purpose. Jung observed that our greatest talents often develop precisely from our wounds and disowned aspects. By keeping these elements in shadow, you remain alienated from your deepest potential. While popular psychology offers oversimplified solutions to complex problems, Jung provided no standardized formula for shadow work. Nevertheless, his writings and clinical practice reveal consistent principles that form the foundation of effective shadow integration. The first principle is radical honesty, developing the capacity to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about yourself without defensive rationalization. This begins with recognizing projection as it occurs. When someone triggers an intense emotional reaction, the Jungian approach isn't to analyze their faults but to ask, what does this reaction reveal about my disowned self aspects? The second principle involves conscious dialogue with shadow content. Jung advocated active imagination, a structured practice of engaging disowned aspects as if they were distinct personalities rather than merely thinking about your shadow. You enter conversation with it, allowing suppressed qualities to express themselves in dialogue with your conscious awareness. The third principle concerns emotional resolution. Shadow integration requires feeling what you've avoided feeling. The shame, grief, rage, or fear associated with disowned aspects. Intellectual understanding alone proves insufficient. The analytical mind can recognize shadow dynamics without creating genuine change if the emotional component remains unaddressed. The fourth principle involves behavioral expression of reclaimed qualities. Integration remains incomplete until shadow elements find constructive expression in your life. The repressed creativity needs creative outlets. The disowned anger requires appropriate assertion. The buried ambition needs achievement channels. This expression rarely looks like uninhibited shadow eruption. Rather, it involves conscious channeling of formerly unconscious energy. The goal isn't possession by the shadow, but partnership with it, allowing disowned qualities to inform conscious choices rather than control unconscious reactions. The shadow contains not just your dysfunction, but your undeveloped potential. This paradox, that your greatest weaknesses and greatest strengths often share common roots, represents one of Jung's most profound insights. Consider how suppressed qualities manifest both destructively and constructively. Unacknowledged anger emerges as passive aggression or self-sabotage, but when integrated, it fuels healthy boundaries and purposeful action. Denied vulnerability appears as emotional unavailability or control issues, but when reclaimed, it enables authentic connection. Repressed sexuality manifests as obsession or avoidance, but when embraced, it becomes a source of vitality and creative power. The shadow's transformative potential explains why genuine breakthroughs often emerge from darkness rather than light. The addiction that leads to spiritual awakening. The relationship failure that reveals authentic needs. The professional breakdown that redirects toward meaningful work. These dark nights function as shadow eruptions that, when properly engaged, initiate profound transformation. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. The shadow's apparent chaos contains precisely the elements needed to complete your psychological cosmos. Its disorders conceal the secret order of your authentic individuation path. The shadow's gifts often include precisely what your conscious personality lacks. The overly responsible develop playfulness. The intellectually rigid discover intuition. The emotionally restricted access passionate creativity. The perpetually accommodating find authentic power. The ruthlessly driven recover sensitivity. These complementary qualities emerge not through acquisition, but through reclamation of what was already present but disowned. This reclamation creates what Jung called the transcendent function, a higher-order psychological organization that transcends the opposition between conscious identity and shadow material. This isn't merely adding shadow qualities to the existing personality, but creating a more comprehensive identity that includes previously warring elements in creative tension. While shadow work may sound esoteric, its practice manifests in concrete, daily choices. Theoretical understanding provides necessary context, but transformation happens through consistent application in ordinary circumstances. The foundation of practical shadow work is self-observation without judgment. This involves developing what Buddhist psychology calls the witnessing capacity, the ability to observe your reactions, projections, and patterns without immediate identification or defense. When triggered by others, this capacity allows momentary space between stimulus and reaction, enough distance to recognize shadow dynamics at work. Journaling provides another practical tool, especially shadow journaling, writing specifically about emotional triggers, dreams, and patterns without censorship or rationalization. The written word often bypasses psychological defenses that maintain shadow blindness. Dream work offers perhaps the most direct shadow access. Jung considered dreams the primary communication channel between conscious and unconscious aspects. Recording and reflecting on dreams, particularly those featuring disturbing content or figures, often reveals shadow material seeking recognition. Relationships provide real-time shadow laboratories. The qualities that most attract or repel you in others reliably indicate shadow projection. Romantic relationships prove especially revealing as initial attraction often represents positive shadow projection that becomes challenging when projections begin returning to their source. This explains the common experience of partners eventually triggering precisely the emotional reactions you most seek to avoid. The woman attracted to a man's strength later resents his dominance. The man drawn to a woman's nurturing later feels suffocated by her care. These aren't relationships gone wrong, but projections returning home. Opportunities for shadow recognition if approached consciously. Creative expression often bypasses conscious defenses, allowing shadow material authentic voice. Writing, art, music, dance, or other forms of creativity frequently reveal shadow content before it reaches conscious awareness. Body awareness provides another shadow access point. Chronic tension, unexplained pain, or recurring illness frequently manifest where emotions remain unexpressed. Conscious attention to physical sensations often reveals shadow material stored somatically. Beyond the personal shadow, Jung's concept of shadow extends beyond individual psychology to collective dimensions. Just as individuals repress qualities deemed unacceptable, cultures and societies collectively disown aspects of human experience incompatible with dominant values. The shadow of Western rationalism appears in widespread disconnection from nature, body, and intuition. The shadow of technological progress emerges in environmental degradation and psychological alienation. The shadow of achievement culture manifests in epidemic anxiety and depression. These aren't merely political problems but collective psychological patterns requiring awareness at a cultural scale. Jung observed that unacknowledged collective shadows inevitably erupt in destructive ways through environmental crises, political extremism, or cultural fragmentation. When cultures project their disowned qualities onto designated others, they create the conditions for conflict justified by righteousness. This collective dimension explains why individual shadow work, while necessary, remains insufficient for comprehensive transformation. Both individuals and cultures require new paradigms that include what previous developmental stages necessarily excluded. Western rationalism need not abandon reason, but can integrate intuition and embodiment. Technological culture need not reject innovation, but can incorporate ecological wisdom. This expanded perspective reveals the ultimate purpose of shadow work, not merely personal healing, but cultural transformation. Those who integrate their personal shadows naturally contribute to collective shadow recognition. Their wholeness creates magnetic fields that attract others toward greater consciousness. Jung distinguished between the small self identified with conscious personality and the self representing the totalizing intelligence of the psyche. Shadow work serves not merely the small self's comfort, but the larger self's imperative toward wholeness. The shadow disturbs conscious comfort precisely because comfort alone cannot fulfill the self's evolutionary purpose. This teleological perspective explains why shadow material creates discomfort despite our attempts at repression. The psyche's inherent movement toward completion ensures that disowned elements continue pressuring consciousness until integration occurs. Jung captured this purposeful dimension when he wrote, "There is no birth of consciousness without pain." The shadow's disruptions, while uncomfortable for the ego, serve the self's imperative toward expanded awareness. What consciousness experiences? As a problem, the self utilizes as an evolutionary catalyst. The shadow ultimately reveals itself not as an enemy, but as an ally, the aspect of yourself that refuses to settle for partial development when wholeness remains possible. Its disruptions signal not dysfunction, but developmental opportunity. Its manifestations indicate not deficiency, but an invitation to greater wholeness. Those who embrace this invitation discover something transformative. The shadow contains precisely what the conscious personality requires for completion. The qualities you've most thoroughly rejected often hold the key to your most authentic expression. The emotions you've most diligently avoided frequently connect you to your deepest values. This paradoxical truth explains why genuine transformation rarely results from pursuing exclusively positive development. Authentic growth emerges not from adding more light, but from integrating darkness. Not through the acquisition of new qualities, but through the reclamation of disowned aspects already present. Jung recognized this counterintuitive wisdom when he wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." True liberation comes not from transcending shadow, but embracing it. Not from achieving perfection, but claiming wholeness that includes all you've disowned. The shadow's ultimate gift reveals itself in the discovery that what you most feared as a threat contains what you most needed for fulfillment. The anger you feared would destroy actually protects what you truly value. The vulnerability you feared would endanger actually connects you to genuine strength. The darkness you feared would consume actually completes your light. Will you continue avoiding your shadow, or will you finally embrace what it offers? The completion of yourself you've sought everywhere but in the darkness you feared to face.